with demand expected to come back, the question remains, does this mean the economy is back on track?
Companies now, after experimenting with offshore in places like India, Philippines, and Poland, want to bring those jobs back.
We invest in the U.S. We're the biggest exporter in the country. In the cycle we're in right now, we're creating jobs.
From Radio America, it's Neil Asbury's Made in America, the show that explores American industry, large and small, and promotes American-made products everywhere. Put Neil Asbury's Made in America to work for you.
A very big welcome to you today. I'm your host, Neil Asbury, together with co-host Dr. Rich Rothman. So, Rich, President Trump, he's pretty open, right? I mean, he campaigns and he kind of says what he's going to do. I think that a lot of Americans are shocked that we actually have politicians who campaign on something and actually turn out to do it, right? Because you had President Obama, I'm going to get tough on Mexico, I'm going to get tough on China. Yeah, nothing.
Well,
happens.
He got tough on Putin, and he called him and said, "Please stop." I mean, that defines the difference.
Don't cross that red line, Well, that didn't.
It didn't work.
That didn't happen.
No.
But even President George W. Bush, I remember him campaigning. Oh, we got to get tough on China, and China's eating our lunch. We got to do something about it. And obviously, it becomes same old, same old. I mean, the politicians get sucked into the machine. And that machine is just kind of churning along. And, there's just not been a personality that's been big enough to take on the machine.
See, I think it just defined it. The politicians are politicians. The difference is that Trump's not a politician. Trump is the private sector guy who's just he's the private person who got involved in the political scenario and landscape because he wanted to do something with this country. But he's not a politician. It's obviously he's not a politician because he's so, articulate in certain ways that most people can't accept. There, a lot of people have trouble with his absolute honesty about it, what he's saying.
What he's going to do is what he's saying. Yeah. Whether you agree with him or not, and I know a lot of people disagree with him, and
a lot of people agree.
And a lot of people do.
This is a split country.
It is, and but when it comes to tariffs, I'm an American exporter. I'm an American manufacturer. I just wish there was another way. And now tariffs in immigration. Well, the guy I go to when I want to talk about trade, and as someone who I've worked with, had the pleasure to work with at the District Export Council at Cato Institute. He's been on our show many times. He's our go-to guy for trade, and since trade is so much in the news today, we're very pleased to have back with us Dan Griswold, who's a senior research fellow at the Mercatus Center at George Mason University. You see him all over the media talking about trade. Dan, welcome to Made in America.
Neal and Rich, I'm really delighted to be with you.
So let's talk about the latest, and that's Mexico. Yeah. I didn't see that one coming, but neither did I see, back in May, as a Sunday afternoon, and I kind of say it's a pretty slow news day, and I kind of open up my phone and kind of reading Newsmax, and there it is, President Trump says he's going from 10% to 25% on China. Didn't see it coming. It was there. He did it. And wow, it's, I guess, a few days away. Well, June 15th, actually, when they'll start collecting those tariffs, which, by the way, I'm going to get hammered on. This is not a good day for me. But it is what it is. And now with Mexico and immigration, a lot of people here in the United States, though, don't support this one. They don't, first of all, Mexico's an ally. And on another hand, we do a lot of business with Mexico. It's one of our most important markets. Got a lot of people over there. Should we be putting tariffs on them instead of trying to work with them? On the other hand, Dan, look, they have done nothing to try to stem this flow of people, and it's getting very, very, very. I mean, those images at our border. I mean, it's not pretty.
Neil, we have a problem at the border, and we could talk quite a while on that. I think part of the problem is the U.S. asylum laws that need to be changed and tightened. We need more judges and detention space down there. Mexico has been cooperating with us. Could you say they could do more? Yes, but it's not that they haven't done nothing. They've tried to police their southern border, which is has a lot of jungle and it's a difficult terrain. remain down there. They have accepted a number of refugees back, asylum seekers back into Mexico, and they're housing them there. So they haven't been uncooperative. We've actually had, because of NAFTA and other developments, we've had a good cooperative relationship. But I would say this, Neal and Rich, whatever problems we have at the border on immigration, this blanket tariff threat against Mexico is not the way to go about fixing it. It actually takes the pressure off Congress and other people here to step up and fix the problem. So these tariffs are not the way to go. We've literally given Mexico days to conform to what exactly? There's been no official pronouncement, no official request of Mexico. It has all the signs of being pretty impulsive. You weren't the only one surprised, Neil. Apparently lots of people in the White House were surprised when the president tweeted this tariff threat against Mexico.
Well, I don't think people want to use tariffs for immigration either, but I have to look at the full spectrum of what we've been watching. And here we have a president. I mean, one of the most important duties of the president is to protect the sovereignty of the United States. I mean, that's way up on top of the litany of things that a president must do, and Congress for that matter. And here he's trying to get a budget passed that would give him the money to do that. They don't get a budget passed. And that's the Republicans as well, by the way. It's not just the Democrats. The Democrats have obstructed across the board in just about everything. He declares a state of emergency so he can use military funds and transfer that to the border. So he can not only just build a wall or reinforce what he's got down there, but also help the humanitarian crisis and get the people that he needs to control and help and take care of and provide medical care and housing and so forth. The people that doesn't happen either, because a democratically appointed federal judge decides to take it upon himself that he will then decide that it's illegal, can't do it, stop it, whatever he can to obstruct the situation. So that happens. So when you think about it, and I understand exactly what you all are saying, but what does a president do when he gets nowhere? And it can't be, well, we have to do better, we got to find a better way. Where? Where are we going to do that? Are we going to do that with the Democrats in the House? When Pelosi today says that, well, I don't want him impeached, I want to see him in jail. Where do you go with that? Where do you go with Elijah Cummings? Where do you go with Jerry Nadler? Where do you go with all these people who for 2.5 years called him a criminal, a treasonous traitor to the United States in the pocket of Putin, and then the guy saying, all right, I'm going to work through this, I can do this, shoot, I can do this, I can do it. But the truth of the matter is, where is he going to turn to? So I guess, he says, okay, look, I got to try this, I got to do something. So I think tariffs is going to catch somebody's attention. It sure as heck did. It caught everyone's attention. I'm looking at a guy right now across this big table, caught his attention, and I'm sure it caught your attention. Well, so what I really want to hear is, where does he go if he's got nowhere to go?
Well, it's above my pay grade to solve all those problems in one fell swoop, but I can pretty confidently say threatening tariffs against Mexico are the wrong way to go. Just look at it from the president's point of view. Most of Mexico's exports go to the United States. Neil, I think it's something like
it's 80% or more, isn't it, Dan?
Yeah.
I read 80%. That's amazing.
Yes.
Hey, by the way, as a business person, you don't put all your eggs in one basket, right? You want to kind of spread those receivables out. Right?
That's one message. Don't rely on the United States as a steady trading partner. But my point is this. If we deliver a body blow to the Mexican economy, these tariffs will hurt Americans, but they'll also hurt Mexicans. If we put tens of thousands of Mexican workers out of a job, they're going to be more inclined to come to the United States. The president, by threatening to sow economic chaos in Mexico, is actually going to increase pressure, the push factors for Mexicans to come into the United States legally or illegally. That's a self-defeating aspect, number one. Number two is the president's top legislative priority of this year is to pass the USMCA, U.S.-Mexico-Canada Agreement. This puts that in jeopardy. The momentum was starting to go the way of USMCA. We got the tariffs lifted against Canada and Mexico. That was the steel tariffs, that was a big impediment here in the United States and in those countries. And now we're going right back to creating ill feelings. This is putting USMCA in jeopardy. This is why U.S. Ambassador Bob Lighthizer, who's no free trader, he's quite a hawk, he opposed this internally because he knows it's going to put USMCA USMCA in jeopardy of passing. There was already a pretty narrow window of getting it passed. So I could talk about the negative economic impact of these tariffs on the United States, but those are examples of where they're undermining the president's own agenda.
Well, the good news is it caught someone's attention in Mexico because they're negotiating as we're talking in Washington right now. So they did say early this morning, this is on a Thursday, that they may delay the Mexican tariffs and see where the talks go. In which case, then the tariffs were just a means of leverage, perhaps.
Yeah, the president, 2 months ago, we could have been talking about the president threatening to shut the entire border with Mexico, which would have been another kind of economic blunder and disaster, and he backed away from that. So that's a fair point. It could be part of just the president's art of the deal, his method of operation, making threats. But this is we're playing with fire here, and there are voices in Congress on both sides of the aisle talking about passing legislation that would nullify these tariffs, which I think would be totally justified. The Constitution says it is up to Congress to determine, to regulate our commerce with foreign nations, to establish duties. The president is imposing these duties under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act of 1977. It's never been used for tariffs. It's never been used on an issue like immigration against a generally friendly country like Mexico. That's why Finance Committee Chair Grassley has said this is an abuse of U.S. trade law that goes far beyond congressional intent. I agree.
Hey, Dan, I got to get you back. Do you have a couple of moments to stay with us? I want to talk about China. I want to talk about Europe.
I certainly do, yes.
Hey, we're talking to Dan Griswold from the Mercatus Center. He is the Senior Research Fellow at George Mason University, a great man and very, very knowledgeable, the go-to guy on international trade. Still much more to talk to with Dan. Don't want to miss it.
Made in America.
Welcome to Made in America. I'm your host, Neal Asbury, together with co-host Dr. Rich Ruffin, and we are with Dan Griswold. He's a Senior Research Fellow at the Mercatus Center at George Mason University. Hey, Dan, boy, so much to talk about, but you talk about that Commerce Clause, and it's Congress, and it's their duty to collect tariffs and taxes and so forth on trade, but, where's Congress in saying, you're not supposed to do this? I mean, I think that the Democrats are so scared to challenge the president on trade, especially with China, because they were supposed to be the ones standing up to China, and they're not doing it. And so now he's using this to fight China, and Congress is just going along with it.
Yeah, that's fair. There are a few issues here, aren't there? On China, I do think the president, there's broad support in Congress for at least confronting China, if not the blanket tariffs that the president has imposed. The steel tariffs, I think there was less support using the Section 232, and there's at least a couple of bills in Congress, one by Senator Portman, one by Senator Toomey, that would put restrictions on the ability of the president to impose duties under national security with Section 232. And then, of course, there's this threat against Mexico, which could get Congress to respond. But you're right, with China using the Section 301, which is what they've used on China, there hasn't been that much pushback. And I think on China, we'd all agree that there's a problem there. The differences are how to go about addressing it. And here again, I think these blanket tariffs that are leaving innocent victims by the hundreds of millions in both countries are not the right approach. There are positive steps we can take to confront China over intellectual property and other issues that don't involve these self-damaging tariffs that are raising prices for American consumers, are disrupting supply chains, are inviting retaliation that is hurting U.S. farmers and other exporters. There is a better way to deal with China.
Well, and that's what I keep coming back to. I agree it would be good if we could do that. And I'm not sure what the better way is. I mean, we try ways and nothing happened. We've been trying. Listen, I think we've been at war with China for 40 years in terms of economics. And we've just let them get away with it. And we've all experienced, Neal has been involved in that. You're in China. You dealt with the Chinese a lot. I did a project down here with macular degeneration and experienced exactly what we're hearing about all the time, the theft of intellectual property rights. So, I mean, I don't know what the better way is, except maybe, I really don't know what the better way is, to be perfectly honest. What I find interesting with everybody, if you think about it, particularly this week with the 75th anniversary of D-Day, it's are we willing to sacrifice something to protect the integrity of manufacturing and products and technology and intellectual property rights in the United States and other Western countries? Where does that all fit in? And what are we willing to sacrifice to make it happen? Does that fit in anywhere? I'm just asking.
Well, so far we've had a lot of pain and no gain. We aren't any closer to a deal with China. And again, Rich, we can agree that there's a problem. Theft is theft of intellectual property. We need to do something about it. Let me just briefly put a couple of things out there. One, the Chinese, you have to look in a broader perspective. The Chinese have moved in a positive direction from where they were 20 or 30 years ago in a number of areas. They're a more open market than they were before they joined the WTO. U.S. exports, Neal knows this, U.S. exports to China have grown pretty rapidly over the last 20 years. It's slowed a little bit lately, and U.S. companies sell another $350 billion of U.S. branded goods and services in China each year through their majority-owned affiliates. They've been a great market, at least up until recently, for U.S. farmers. They've liberalized their foreign investment. It used to be less than 50% of investment was 100% foreign-owned and not joint venture. Now that's 70 or 80%, and there's no technology transfer there. So they've been moving in the right direction in a lot of areas, somewhat backtracking recently. We've taken them to the WTO a number of times, and they have moved in a market reform direction every time. They don't just ignore that. We can bring direct legal action against Huawei and other companies like that. That's the right way to go. But these blanket tariffs, the tariffs against China are causing more damage to the U.S. economy than anything China has done.
Very interesting perspective. And, a lot of people share that, and other people believe that China's got to be brought to the carpet. It's just a very complicated thing. Like you said, it's a hard thing, a hard circle to square. Hey, let's move over to Europe for a second. The president was in Europe, the whole thing with Brexit, telling the UK, we're going to make an incredible deal with you. You leave the European Union. Don't worry about it. We're going to be here for you. What's going on with our trade relationships with the EU and potentially a post-Brexit UK?
Yeah, well, first off, we have a very important and mutually beneficial trade relationship with the European Union. If you look at the European Union as a whole, which is probably the right way to look, right? They're a customs union. They are, in a lot of ways, our number one trading partner and commercial partner in terms of investment. And the UK is very special. We do more services trade with the United Kingdom than with any other country, two-way. We actually do more services trade with the UK than we do goods trade. And if they do leave the European Union, I think we should sign a trade agreement with them. I've written a paper for Mercatus that your listeners can find at mercatus.org on why a U.S.-UK free trade agreement would be a good thing, and here's how to go about negotiating it. I don't know where we're headed with Europe. You remember we had negotiations going on with them, the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership, TTIP. Tariffs on goods are already pretty low. The last things remaining are the really hard things, right? Agriculture, some of the services area, technology. So I don't know where we're going to go. The Europeans don't want to put agriculture on the table, and yet U.S. farmers and ag representatives insist that's necessary. So I just hope we don't go to a trade war with Europe either. We're already about to have a two-front war. I don't want to have a three-front war with one of our other major trading partners. The auto tariffs would be disastrous.
Yeah, Dan, hey, Dan, it'd be interesting to see what happens with the auto tariffs if they should come about 25% on autos. I mean, that's going to hurt, Germany for one. So, hey, we've been together with sharing some time with Dan Griswold from the Mercatus Center at George Mason University, the authority on trade here in the United States. Hey, Dan, thanks for being with us.
Neal and Rich, it was a pleasure.
Coming up, we have Paul McDonald, who's the Senior Executive Director at Robert Half Staffing, and they just published a piece, very fascinating, that 49% of Americans believe that AI, artificial intelligence, robots, will have no impact on their jobs. I mean, it's a fascinating topic. We're going to address it right now. Stay with us. Paul McDonald from Robert Half Staffing coming on just in a moment.
Made in America.
Sharply higher at the open, stocks continued to perform well over the course of the day Tuesday.
And I think that bodes well here over the next couple of years for having bigger demands coming to this country.
Now, more of Neal Asbury's Made in America.
Welcome to Made in America. I'm your host, Neal Asbury, together with co-host Dr. Rich Ruffman. So, Rich, just like we have shifting sands and insuperable mountains in the world of international trade, we have the same thing going on with our workplace. What's happening in the American work environment. And we used to have the robot report, and I know that you're very passionate about that and how robots on many things, and especially with the minimum wage. We've had a lot of shows where we talked about the minimum wage, $15 an hour, and some localities in the United States, I believe Seattle, what are they talking about? $19, $20, this minimum wage thing. And what does a lot of American business do? Well, they move out of those localities, jurisdictions, and they move to some place where they can be a viable business. And the other thing, Rich, is that they start investing in artificial intelligence.
That's right.
Robots, right?
That's right.
I mean, robots are doing so many things. I mean, robots are going to be driving our cars here. I mean, it's fascinating. They're going to be working in warehouses. They're going to be picking and packing orders. They're going to be flipping hamburgers. They're going to be serving the hamburger. I mean, it's amazing what's going on with the revolution in AI.
See, if you don't see what's coming, then it really does hurt you, doesn't it? It's sort of like, I don't know, guys who had horses, and they said, well, that's a ridiculous buggy. It's got no horse. How could it get around? It's never going to get around. No one's going to ever want that. How could you get rid of your horse? Your horse can kiss you. Can that car kiss? I mean, what I'm saying? And they didn't see it coming. They didn't see it coming.
Well, that horse could make a big mess as well.
That horse can make a big mess as well. But on the other hand, the horse could. Anyway, but the point is that, we've been discussing this for quite a while, and AI is a major threat to jobs in the future. And I'm looking forward to hearing about it. Well, maybe it is. Maybe I think it is.
Well, let's have that conversation right now, right here at Made in America with Paul McDonald, Senior Executive Director at Robert Half Staffing. They published a piece just recently that Americans foresee no effect, or only 49% of Americans, which that's a lot of Americans, say that there will be no effect with artificial intelligence or robots in the workplace, at least as it relates to their jobs. Very fascinating. Paul, welcome to Made in America.
Thank you for having me.
So tell us about this paper, this report that you wrote. And, it's kind of counterintuitive, right? I mean, I would have thought that a lot of people would think in at least certain jobs within our economy, which is very, very millions of jobs in our economy, that would be impacted by artificial intelligence. Yet you say 49% of workers say they don't see any problem at all.
Yes. When we entered into this study, Neal and Rich, it really was about, so are workers going to be displaced from their jobs by AI, artificial intelligence, machine learning, and all the above? And so we embarked upon this and did a survey. We wanted to have some data. So we polled 2,800 workers throughout the United States in various cities. And this polling results came back where we thought there was going to be fear from individuals, and they were going to be worried about their positions, worried about their jobs, worried about their industries. 49% came back and said no impact on AI on their jobs. But the thing that also came back was 39% felt positive that there was going to be a positive impact on their positions. So that leaves only 12% or 13% thinking negative impact on their jobs, which the results did surprise me.
Well, it'd be interesting. What in the universe that you polled? I mean, where do these folks come from? I mean, what's their psychographics and so forth?
Yeah, there are 2,800 people in 28 different cities, all office workers. So we're talking about individuals that are working as administrators, as finance and accounting individuals, technology, could be creative and marketing, legal. So think about the office worker as opposed to all workers that encompass the manufacturing shop floor and the like.
So that's interesting because evidently they feel they're safe, in the administrative level of a company or mid-administrative level of a company. Maybe what we're hearing then, and it'd be interesting, what do the frontline workers think? Those who are actually, dealing face to face with the customers, those driving the cabs, those driving the trucks, those driving the planes, those in the manufacturing sector.
Did you poll any Uber drivers?
No. Well, we only, Robert Half, we only cover the office worker, accounting, finance, technology, creative, marketing. So that was our audience. We wanted to really poll the audience that we for the past 71 years have been dealing with. So the thing is that really...
Well, that's probably because they want a robot sitting next to them so they could be on Facebook all day. I don't know.
Well, the key finding here is for those workers that came back, they really told us, it said, it's going to allow things like data entry, tasks that are, mundane tasks like bank reconciliations or account reconciliations to be done by the computer and allow them to do more strategy and analysis work. So, just to give you a for instance. So the robotic process automation is very alive and well within the office or business environment in the front office. So the workers coming back and saying they're going to be able to focus more on strategy. By the way, to go along with this study, we did poll 1,200 managers that are in the front office managing these departments that I've been talking about. They feel strongly that they'll be able to retrain and upskill their current employee base to meet the demands of AI and robots or bots within their environment. So, but they also are worried about being able to hire in new staff that have the new skills. So to meet the demand, they're hopeful that they'll be able to retrain and upskill the people, but also hire people externally, either on a direct hire basis or on a consulting or temporary basis to meet the demands as the business moves forward in the AI world.
Hey, Paul, thanks for being on the show. Very fascinating stuff. Fascinating study, fascinating work. Paul McDonald, Senior Executive Director at Robert Half Staffing. Paul, thanks for coming on.
Thank you.
Coming up, we have Mark Hamrick from Bankrate.com. We're going to talk about the job market, what to expect. Unemployment in April was 3.6%. Is that sustainable? Lots of things to talk about with Mark. You don't want to miss it.
Made in America.
Welcome to Made in America. I'm your host, Neal Asbury, together with co-host Dr. Rich Rothman. So fascinating. AI, artificial intelligence, robots in the workplace. What is that going to do to our economy? And will it make us more efficient? Will it make us more prosperous? Will we be stronger? I mean, so many questions. But whenever there is this technology shift that inevitably happens in our country, and it happens more and more often, it takes us shorter and shorter periods of time to reinvent ourselves. we become a better nation.
Well,
something very good comes out of it.
It opens up other doors, and it makes you look at something differently. It shifts the paradigm again, and then you have to look at things not the way they were because you realize that doesn't exist anymore. So that's a good thing. It moves us forward. It happens in such a rapid pace now that it's almost breathtaking.
Absolutely. And so, let's talk about the job market. Hey, this is all about jobs here at Made in America. We're very pleased to have on right now Mark Hamrick joining us again from Bankrate.com to talk about the job market. Mark, welcome to Made in America.
Good to be with you.
So, Mark, it's great to see, April unemployment at 3.6%. There was a poll out the other day that 54% of Americans believe that President Trump will be reelected. And at this point in President Obama's first term, only 50% of the people thought that he would be reelected. The economy is booming. The president, elicits all sorts of responses from all kinds of different people. But the majority of Americans, the overwhelming majority, that would be a landslide, 54%. If a presidential candidate got 54% of the vote. The economy really, and jobs in general, Americans are very optimistic about their economic future.
Well, I guess I might have a little bit of a different read than that because what we find consistently at Bankrate is that essentially a broad cross-section of the American public is living paycheck to paycheck. And so we try to measure things that are a little less sentiment-oriented and try to measure things that have to do with how they're actually doing. And it's obviously true that once we get into July, the U.S. economic expansion becomes a record breaker in U.S. history. But you don't have to travel very far in this country to see communities that have been left behind in the expansion, and that gets to the pieces that you talked about earlier with regards to technology and globalization. And obviously, the globalization debate is ongoing with questions being raised about whether too much was given up and whether we need to try to put some of that genie back in a bottle, which obviously infers the notion that you try to bring some manufacturing production back to the U.S., but also, the smokestacks of today aren't quite like the ones from 70 years ago. So to the broader question about what the job market's doing, I think this is one of the more stellar aspects of measures that we see of the U.S. economy. As you say, 3.6% by last measure. We'll see how that fared in May. We had a bit of a scare with the private payrolls reading from ADP earlier in the week, which was a huge miss, only 27,000 jobs added. And I do think that part of that is that small business is having a hard time finding well-qualified workers. They don't have the scale or the resources to hire people that larger enterprises do. But there's also unquestionably a slowdown in the goods-producing realm. And manufacturing does seem to be ground zero for that right now.
Let me ask you this. I was going to mention that, and I'm glad you brought it up. The ADP report that came out, you're right, showed payrolls up sad 27,000 jobs. But we have the numbers coming out, I believe, tomorrow. And how do you think that's going to compare to the ADP? I was listening to Maria Bartiromo this morning, and she was indicating with a number for guests that the ADP is not necessarily the best indicator. However, not a bad indicator, just not the best indicator. And yet they were fairly more optimistic with the numbers that could come out tomorrow. And the range that they said it was about 150 to 217,000. What are your thoughts on that?
First of all, ADP is not a good predictor with respect to the number itself, but it is a good predictor with respect to the direction of change. And so, for example, if we were to have a blowout surprise in a given month, meaning we'd have many more jobs created than typically the case with the government report, you would typically see an upside surprise or a change to the upside with respect to the ADP reading. So they are different data sets. I do think you can make a mistake by trying to say, well, ADP said this and therefore the government will be this. But it does tell us something's happening out there because that is real data. And we do know that, for example, job cut announcements are rising. Challenger Grain Christmas data tells us that. It's beginning to infect areas of the economy that previously were unscathed, like the industrial sector, technology, and certainly autos, and retailing, of course, at the top of the list, and we think we know why that's happening. So, fingers crossed. We just completed our quarterly economic survey. survey at Bankrate of economists, 80% do believe the downside risks predominate right now, and that's how you get a number of things percolating around the periphery that include investors essentially betting the house that the Fed will cut rates, as well as, of course...
Is that what you believe? I mean, do you think that the Fed will cut rates? I mean, that's been a pretty hot topic, especially with the president. And what does the tea leaves tell you?
Well, let's try to say what we know for sure before we sort of get ahead of ourselves on playing the fortune telling piece, which investors obviously need to do because they need to make a bet to get their money in the right place, or at least make a bet. So, with respect to what we know, as of last December, and I attend these policy setting news conferences on a regular basis, have been since they began, the Federal Reserve Chair's news conference. Last December, the message from the Fed was get ready for more rate increases in 2019. And as has been widely reported, essentially we got into the year and Jerome Powell and company basically said, hey, wait a minute, we're not quite sure that's the right thing to do. And as recently as the past few days, the chairman seemed to, I think the way to look at it would be to say he didn't take aggressive issue with at least the suggestions in the marketplace that the Fed could be taking these more accommodative steps. So I don't think we'll see a rate move of any kind at the June meeting. Personally, I think you need to see more actual data in the economy showing more stress than what we're actually seeing. The Beige Book Survey, which is a kind of a regional roundup of economic conditions prepared for the FOMC meeting we just got a few days ago, basically looked fine. I mean, there are stresses being seen that are related to tariffs and uncertainty, but in terms of reports about hiring and some of the other measures, I just didn't see anything in there that made a case for either a rate hike or a rate cut. And so my own opinion is that what consumers, borrowers, investors ought to be doing right now is to just say it may well be that for the time being, rates aren't going any higher, but I also wouldn't be playing a strong hand right now to say I think rates should be going substantially lower from here.
Hey, Mark, it's really great to have you with us. Very, very succinct, very, very right on target. We really appreciate your commentary. Mark Hamrick from Bankrate.com. Thanks for being with us, Mark.
Always great to be with you. Thanks for having me.
Coming up, Dr. Rothman and I are going to have some final thoughts for the day.
Made in America.
Welcome to Made in America. I'm your host, Neal Asbury, together with co-host Dr. Rich Rothman. Rich, I can't believe that we're at this point in our adventure, our show, which I love very much. I love being here with you and hearing all the wisdom that comes out of you. And you were just dying to talk about bond inversions.
I wish we had more time. I wanted to do this. I wanted to ask our last guest what he thought about it.
I kind of glaze over when we start talking about bond inversions.
I can give you something. I have something.
Can you crack the code for me?
Yeah. It was mentioned in the last 10 days that when you have an inverted yield curve on bonds, it is every recession has had exactly an inverted yield curve on bonds. I'm going to explain what that means in a sec. But it doesn't mean every inverted yield curve brought a recession. There's a differentiation. Now, the question is, what is that? What does that mean?
Please.
Does it mean anything?
Enlighten me.
All right. An inverted yield curve occurs when long-term debts have a lower yield as compared with short-term debts. Higher long-term rates reflect expectations that growth will continue. All right. But when the difference between a short and long-term rate narrow, it's a signal that people are less certain about the growth is here to stay. And that can produce a recession. That's the best I can give you. PhD in English, not economics, just saying.
That kind of makes sense.
Just saying.
That kind of makes sense.
I just wanted to point that out. It was bothering me. I know it bothered you. I could see it in your face.
It did. I mean, when you were talking about bond inversions and we couldn't get to it, I said, wow, we just can't let that be. We can't let that be.
No.
So, but I think,
Rich,
I mean, it's the economy is really defying itself. At least it defies my logic, my little personal logic, from where I sit, that you have all this stuff going on in the world and you have all these tariffs, and you would think that these tariffs would be smacking at everybody's income. I mean, the business's income, and for that matter, the American people's income. I mean, it just seems to intuitively mean that, if you got all these tariffs and, 25% on, your largest source of manufactured goods, China, that it would make a huge impact on the profitability of businesses. People not buying as much, or they have to sell their products at less of a gross margin. They make less money. Now, Mexico, which is also a huge source of a lot of the sort of commoditized products that we use in our daily lives, and, are there going to be tariffs there? However, the market, kind of goes down a little bit, but then a couple of days later, it comes roaring back. It's amazing.
Roared back this week in one day, 500 points.
That's right. That's what I'm talking.
That's a huge
That's
increase.
what I'm talking. I mean, so it just kind of defies logic that the economy could be taking, all of these hits. And I think under any other president, if this were to be happening, you would see the Black Friday and, it seems to always happen in October. But, these massive corrections that always happen on Friday, on one of the Fridays in October, and the market just absolutely gets destroyed. You would think that we would see something like that, but it's not happening. It's not happening at all.
One of the things, I have to segue and get this in. One of the things that did occur this week is the European Central Bank, the ECB, did set long-term view on banks to hold on their rates. So they're not anticipating raising rates in Europe. Now, take that thought and plug it into the Fed Reserve here, and we're hearing that they're considering holding. Their long-term view right now is to hold, and hopefully they're being talked to and listened to, and people are discussing it, that we might actually get a rate 1 or 2 times drop this year. So it's very interesting. I mean, we live in very interesting times, and I agree with you. I think the market, remember we said things occur and people shift. They're out of the paradigm. They're looking differently. Well, I think the market's looking differently, because we're up and down and up and down. Let me tell you this.
Yeah. In the Obama economy, I mean, interest rates were essentially zero.
Well,
right? And the economy wasn't doing anything.
And they were printing a lot of money.
But they were
bailing him out with a lot of cash on the street.
But interest rates, I mean, at the Federal Reserve level was essentially zero.
That's right.
And now, they've gone up substantially under President Trump.
Well, they came up very, very quickly, and that's why Mr. Trump was concerned with that, because he thought he overheated the economy that way.
Right. But this economy is booming. The market is booming with these higher interest rates. I think it says a lot about the Trump economy. I mean, Obama couldn't get it going with 0% interest, and Trump's got it going with rather, sizable interest when you compare it to the Obama years. Anyway,
you know what it is? It's Trump's magic wand that Mr. Obama thought. What does he have? A magic wand? I guess that's it.
Well, you know what it is? And I hate to tell you this, Rich.
Oh, God, I know.
But we're out of time.
I hate that.
Can you believe that?
I know. And all our friends in West Virginia and Chicago.
All the entrepreneurs and small businesses sitting there, wanting to jump in and trying to get some advice. We'd love to give it to you, but guess what? We're going to be back again next week at the same time for another adventure of Made in America, where we never stop fighting or giving you advice of how to create your jobs and your businesses. You always want to come back right here to be with Rich and I for Made in America.